But first up, since his brother George Zimmerman was identified as the shooter in the killing of Trayvon Martin, my first guest tonight has been a tireless spokesman for his family. Please welcome Robert Zimmerman. Hey, Robert. How you doing?
Okay.
Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we had a very funny monologue. I think you'd agree.
Yes.
All right. But now we go to a serious subject because it is about the one-year anniversary of this tragedy. And I know you're here because you think the media has been unfair to your brother and the family, and that may be the case.
Right.
I was not there that night.
Right.
You know, there are some cases that are slam dunks. O.J. always comes to mind.
Right.
You know, I never felt bad about those jokes because I know he killed his wife.
Sure.
I don't know about this one, but I know you feel, you know, obviously race has been central to this. Let's get something right from the get-go out in the open. What is your race? What are you? Because your name sounds Jewish.
Right, right.
But you say there's blackness in your family.
Yes.
Who the fuck are you?
We had, you know, in our race, we're American first and foremost, and it really doesn't matter, you know, what our race is. We have a lineage, Afro-Peruvian. There were slaves in Peru, and they were liberated just like the slaves here, and they assimilated.
But Zimmerman is a Jewish name.
It is, and our father is from German descent, and I think that's...
But not Jewish?
No, not Jewish. I think some Jews actually changed their name to Zimmerman in an attempt to hide from the Nazis back when they were being persecuted, and he's one of those of that German descent. Okay,
and on your mother's side there is...
She's Peruvian, Afro-Peruvian.
Okay.
Yes.
Afro-Peruvian.
Afro-Peruvian, yeah, there's a lot of different, in fact, Peru had
a fragrance.
Yeah, Peru had a Japanese president, and there's different cultural lineages in Peru, and she comes
But
from
you
that.
would agree, I would assume that racism is complicated. I mean, I was just talking about Dorner, this nut who we killed this week. I noticed, you know, on his manifesto, he said, he was talking about a lot of people in the public eye. He said, Fareed Zakaria, you know who that is? You know Fareed Zakaria. He said, he should be, he said, he should be deported.
Wow.
Now, here's a guy whose whole beef is with the LAPD because they're racist. He's a black guy. But he's saying Fareed Zakaria, because why? Fareed is brown and has an accent.
Right.
And to me, there's a black guy being racist. It says to me that racism is a little more complicated.
It's complicated. It gets kind of mixed up sometimes with some of the prejudices that people carry, and sometimes, you know, being a little sensitive to people having prejudices or ways they think about other cultures. I think it's cultural more than race. At least that was my experience growing up. We had two cultures in our home. We didn't make racial distinctions, but we knew that Dad and his American ways were one way of doing things, and our mother and her Peruvian ways were another, and in our home it was blended. So I think it's something like you said, Zimmerman, it doesn't sound Hispanic, and we saw that firsthand growing up when people would say, you know, Mrs. Zimmerman, and our mother would stand up and they'd say, no, we didn't say Mrs. Lopez, we said Mrs. Zimmerman.
Right.
You know, it made us more sensitive to the reality, and we grew up in Manassas where the first shot of the Civil War was fought. That racism is complicated. It is still alive. I do think it is. I do think it's still a factor. It's obviously a factor, or the allegation of it in this case. But it does get a little confused sometimes with just simple prejudices people have. And I'm not endorsing either one. I'm just saying that it's more complicated, and I'm glad we're talking about it.
Your brother, talking to you, I've never met you.
Right.
And obviously I've never met him. And I don't know what happened, as I said, but you don't seem like him. You think you're like him?
Physically,
you seem like a very gentle guy who would not have been doing what he was doing, looking to be a what do you call it, a neighborhood watch guy.
Sure, sure.
Kind of looking for trouble.
I think that if
Getting into trouble sometimes. He'd had scrapes with the law.
He did, yeah. I mean,
you don't seem to be that guy.
I've had scrapes with the law, I think.
Really? What'd you do?
Oh, Bill, I'm not on the stand. I mean, I've had scrapes with the law. I plead the fifth. But yeah, but if we grew up in a community without gates. George moved to a gated community, and this word gate seems to imply, just like there were implications of the word white, black, and gated community, which kind of got the ball rolling in this case, some kind of safety or some kind of insulation from crime. I think that the reality of Sanford, Florida, is that it is a high crime area, and sometimes it's not only race that's a factor, but the geography is a factor, and what was going on in the police department historically, why people came to the conclusion that this was being covered up, and they were covering up the white man's actions. Well, George isn't white and he'll never be white, but that certainly was an element at the time.
I don't want to get too deeply into the weeds of the case, but I want to ask you one question. I mean, on that night, obviously, he was on his watch.
No, he wasn't.
Well,
he was going to Target, and that's one of the misconceptions when they say...
Well, but then he put himself on watch.
Well, he was asked by...
He sure got distracted.
He got distracted, I'll give you that, sure.
He saw a guy he thought was suspicious.
Correct.
I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be talking.
Correct.
Okay. He said that he thought Trayvon Martin was looking into windows.
Right.
But that's not what he told the cops when he talked to them. He said the guy was up to no good, and these assholes always get away with it.
Yeah, I mean,
if he thought he was looking into windows, as he said later, why didn't he use those words instead of just the very general, he's up to no good?
I don't think, you know, these assholes always get away helped him out. You know, I know that much ado was made about the word coon and whether or not he used it, because there really was no storyline to this racism. There was no evidence for it. And so the media just made up his race and made up something he had said, which was just abjectly false.
But what about that very specific thing? Looking into windows. That's what he wants us to believe Trayvon Martin was doing. But that's not what he said at the time.
I'm not saying that that's the exclusive thing. And I think that George has been clear that there was a variety of factors, you know, even the weather. In Florida, sometimes it's a light rain and it turns into a deluge in a matter of seconds.
That's why you got to wear a hoodie.
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, Geraldo Rivera made a big point about it. And, I mean, do you really think that that had no effect on it if he was, instead of a black teenager wearing a hoodie, if it was Mitt Romney and mom jeans and a cardigan?
Right, sure. Yeah, I think that George knew one thing. He knew that he had never seen this person before. He knew it was raining, and he knew that it was suspicious and warranted investigation by the police. Unfortunately, he got in the situation, and I've been in this situation, where you kind of end up being the eyes and ears of the police on the ground. They ask you things and prompt you in certain ways. Like, for example, where is he running now? Where is he going? Which is on that call as well. Which, after that question, he opens the door to his car. Now, George or I or you or anybody else who calls the police may make mistakes. And there may be a certain conversation we have to have about protocols of the person on the other line who's supposedly more in charge than just the average citizen. But I think that this would have happened regardless of the person's race. It happened not because George was racist, because he really had a problem with crime, and that community was victimized constantly by crime.
But, all right, I believe that. But why is it's the stand your ground law, and yet he was following Trayvon Martin?
Sure, yeah, I understand. Yeah, I get that all the time.
People have trouble with that.
They do.
What do you say about that?
No, they do, and I'm glad you brought it up. Stand your ground is not a factor in this defense. Stand your ground did a couple different, I don't want to get overly legal, but it kind of prevented people from being dragged through civil court when they're found criminally innocent of a crime. Now, what happened there and why it's not a factor is because stand your ground removes the duty to retreat, a presumed duty to retreat sometimes, like if someone comes in here with a gun, why are we not just running out the door? Why would someone take out a gun and shoot him? And then you get into this slippery slope of, is it homicide or not? You're not presumed able to be in a retreatable position when someone is sitting on top of you, slamming your head into the concrete repeatedly after they've broken your nose. There is no ability or capacity one has at that time
we don't know that.
Well,
I don't know that, and you're a family member.
Sure.
So you can't be objective either.
Well,
I'll grant you the media.
Right.
That's
what I'm really, focused on is, you know, these pictures that didn't exist.
But you can't honestly tell me you're objective either.
Well, the doctor who examined him, you know, thought he had a broken nose. The pictures in the back of the police car.
Oh, there was a fight. All I'm saying is, without the guns involved, wouldn't it have been just a guy who lost a fight?
I think I agree that that's a factor, and it's worth talking about. It's a conversation we should have, but I think people like George and other concealed weapon carriers may have that weapon to begin with because of the situation they find themselves in, and it wasn't 90210, it was Sanford, Florida, you know.
Well, I don't know what the future is, I don't know what the truth is. I think we both want justice done.
Correct.
I hope it gets done.
Thank you.
You're a good spokesman, you got a future in this industry. All right, thanks for coming by, Robert.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Robert Zimmerman, let's meet our panel.